Right, Roger Edwards. This is episode 39. We have reviewed our fair share of movies. We've covered all genres from horror to action to thriller to intrigue. But this is, I'm pretty sure, the very first courtroom drama that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, A Few Good Men. So it is courtroom drama. I guess technically it's court-martial room drama, isn't it? Because the characters are in the Navy and the Marine Corps. But a relatively old film now. I mean, when we decided to do this film, Pascal, I mean, it's one of my favourite courtroom films of all time. One of my favourite films of all time, full stop. And then I was really quite shocked to discover that it was actually released in 1992. I just couldn't believe it was as old as that. So a relatively early performance for Tom Cruise.
Well, indeed, and like you, when I did the research, and I remember the movie so well, it feels it was more recent, but also, of course, it was more the memory of, I used to own the movie on VHS cassette, which is always a very strong hint. That was a long time ago, and somehow I never did replace it to a DVD or even Blu-ray. So in fact, the last time I would have watched a movie would have been late 90s before I had to let go painfully with much tears. My VHS collection had to be either given away or thrown away because I had to make room for DVDs and the rest. But the movie just left such an impression, which has been the case for most people, I'd imagine, including critics.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those movies that is just full of quotable lines. I mean, there are so many quotable lines. I often think I could probably recite the entire film myself. And actually, even though Tom Cruise is the headline, we've also got Jack Nicholson in there, and I mean his part. He out of a two and a bit hour running time, Jack Nicholson's probably only in it for a maximum of 20 minutes, I would say. But my goodness, doesn't he dominate the 20 minutes that he's in? Similarly, you've got Demi Moore, big star in those days, Kevin Pollak, Kevin Bacon, Keith Sutherland, massive stars now, but none of them get to swamp the film and take it over as their own. It's definitely an ensemble. And in fact, ultimately, Tom Cruise's character doesn't have that much dialogue either.
That's fascinating, and we've got, therefore, to celebrate the work of both, firstly, the writer, to begin with, and then the director. Now, I did not know this until I kind of quickly did some research for today, that this was based on the play.
Yes, it is.
And I didn't know the play was based on real events.
Yes, it is.
So
yeah. And I think, I mean, without giving the plot away too much, but in the end of the film, the two guys who are accused of murder, I mean, the whole point of the film is that they do get convicted of conduct unbecoming a Marine Corps officer, and therefore they get dishonourably discharged. Now, apparently, the real story upon which the film was based and the play was based, the equivalent person who was accused of murder and then didn't get convicted of murder didn't get dishonourably discharged. He was reinstated within the Marine Corps, and apparently that individual was quite annoyed by the way the film portrayed his character.
Right. Well, it makes sense, but equally, it had to be a work of fiction.
Of course.
So the writer Aaron Arkin worked, obviously. I think that was probably his first transition from play, as in stage, to screen. But then if you look at what he did afterwards, I think clearly he has a knack for things. So he did The American President with Michael Douglas, The West Wing, and of course later on The Social Network, directed by David Fincher. So obviously he kind of loves this idea of an institution that is all about covering up, and Jack Nicholson, I think, what a force. It's been quite interesting to be on set with him, suggesting that an older figure with authority who basically doesn't care much about the truth. I mean, obviously this is fiction. That would never happen in real life, really, Roger. But your point about, the different characters, the way in which Rob Reiner made sure that this was not a Tom Cruise vehicle, this was not a Jack Nicholson movie. Everybody, even the supporting cast, when they were on screen and when they were the dialogue, it was just compelling. And the 2 hour, 20 minutes just goes by so quickly.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those films where they have taken hours and hours and hours and hours and hours over each particular line of dialogue. And there isn't a piece of dialogue in there that doesn't advance the plot, doesn't point towards one of the arguments they're making in court. Every single line is absolute perfection, and I think that is probably why none of the characters gets that spotlight. Now, Jack Nicholson, obviously tour de force, as you've said. I think his performance in this film is he's scary as well. You know, that bit early in the film where he goes, "Of course you can have the report, but you've got to ask me nicely." You know, and all of a sudden they bring the music in and they do the close-up on his face. And then the camera zooms out to Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise genuinely suddenly looks like a 15-year-old boy because Jack Nicholson is so scary in that moment. But I've also read people who think, nah, he was just hamming it up. He was chewing the scenery. It was just a ham-fisted performance. But to me, again, in that last sequence, where he's, Santiago's death is tragic, but it probably saved lives. He's just, and then he's got, you can't handle the truth, and all of that stuff at the end is just edge of the seat stuff. And, I always hold my breath during that scene, even though I've seen it about 30 odd times.
But you know for a fact that the dialogue is inspired by statements that people like, the character of Colonel Jessup from memory, played by Jack Nicholson. You just know that what that generation was all about. That's how they spoke. I mean, the way he's so dismissive of Demi Moore when the first encounter, and when he discovers that, God forbid, Demi Moore is actually superior in rank to the character of Tom Cruise, and Jack Nicholson's character can't even cope with it and just laughs it off, thinking, well, it's just nonsense that we have to put up with right now, but I'm not going to go with it. And I think this is also about generation. This is about, the changing of times and new values that the movie is capturing. But for 1992, I think it was ahead of the time in terms of exploring what was around the corner.
Yeah, and a couple of things as well. 1992, before mobile phones, before, digital technology. And yet when I watch the film, I don't feel as if it's dated. Maybe it's because it's mainly set in a courtroom and therefore it doesn't rely upon digital technology. And, they do fly down to Guantanamo Bay a couple of times and there are a few scenes in people's apartments as they're preparing their defences, but you don't feel as if it's a film that is old because it hasn't got the tech in it, because it doesn't rely on tech anyway. And I think that's quite fascinating. And another thing which I think you would have expected a film like this, with the tension between Tom Cruise and Demi Moore, that at some point in the film they'd have got together. And I remember when I watched it the first time and she comes and she invites him to go out and they go out to a seafood restaurant, you just thought, he's obviously going to fall into bed with her and there's going to be a rampant scene and then it'll get back to the plot. And actually kudos to the writers for not doing that. And again, that was just, Demi Moore and Tom Cruise don't get it on.
Well,
wow,
you will have even more respect with the writer and the director when you hear that they were under pressure to make Demi Moore fall for Tom Cruise. And they basically push back and push back and push back, and to the point where the financiers, who clearly have no idea how to make movies, they just have the money, say, well, what is the point of having Demi Moore then if she's not going to get a kit off? And you kind of go, do you know what? Apart from deserving probably a punch in the face by either Tom Cruise or Jack Nicholson, or both, just leave us do what we do best, because it wouldn't advance the story. Can we quickly also mention Kevin Pollak, who I absolutely adore. Whatever he does, I think he does it well. I mean, I suppose you could say that to all of them, from J.G. Walsh, I actually like as well as Cuba Gooding Jr., of course.
Yes. I mean, Kevin Pollak's got quite a restrained role, hasn't he? He's the straight man, I guess, and the voice of reason.
That's right.
Interesting to see Cuba Gooding Jr. I recently saw Cuba Gooding Jr. in a film which has only been made in the last few years, and obviously is considerably older now. And I said to my wife, "Is that Cuba Gooding Jr.?" "Oh yeah, so it is. Yeah." So such a great cast,
great actor, and of course they'll work. Tom Cruise and Cuba Gooding Jr. will work again years later on Jerry Maguire. But so this movie was released at a very strange time. I wanted to get your reaction on that, Roger. This movie was released in December of 91 in the US, and then kind of ran its course, and was released in January, the 1st of January 92 in the UK. Actually, the premiere was in Manchester at the Old Odeon. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. That's not exactly a Christmas movie. That's not exactly the right time. Was it just simply what they had to do, or was there some kind of marketing angle in there which escapes me?
I don't know. I mean, you never, ever, ever, ever hear people having the old Christmas movie argument about Few Good Men, do you? I mean, it's like, oh, it's definitely a Christmas movie because he's eating an apple or something like that. But like you do with Die Hard, that's an age-old argument. But I didn't even know that, Pascal. I would have said if you'd have asked me that it came out in the summer.
No, I remember going to the movies to see it, of course, because you're right, the ensemble cast, which I don't think they do as well nowadays. Maybe it's just nostalgia that is taking over here. But certainly, as soon as I could, got the video cassette. Now, at the time, I was still working in a video store. What a job to have when you're a student. And we had to buy several copies because they would go so quickly. But certainly, I never then moved on to the DVD that was released in 97. So 97 being the year where the first DVDs came out. So it must have been one of the first few movies to get that kind of transfer over. But yeah, I mean, what a movie. And when it comes to marketing, because I think we should talk about
that
marketing. And I've been reflecting on it. And I think for me, it is actually all about the trailer, because what else was there in 92? Yeah. I think the poster is kind of, sure, why not? The faces of Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson and Demi Moore. But actually the trailer, I would recommend people, and we might actually put the link in the show notes, if you watch it and look at the structure and how they share the story just enough, but also to your point, even in the trailer, Tom Cruise must say about 3-4 words, if that.
And again, I've already said this in the show today, that sometimes the memory cheats. So I can't put my hand on my heart and say this is absolutely what happened. But that absolutely and utterly remarkable bit at the start during the credits, when you've got this long line of riflemen stood on the parade ground, and they sort of do this incredible choreographed way of flipping their rifles onto their shoulders, but it goes down the line like a line of dominoes, and the timing is just absolutely incredible. And my wife, every time we watch this, it says, how on earth did they synchronize themselves so perfectly to make it look like a fluid movement? Now, I'm pretty sure that initially one of the reasons why this film caught my attention before we went to see it is that somebody, it must have been on TV, maybe it's in the trailer, I've not watched the trailer for a long time, but that sequence I saw before the film, and that was one of the reasons why I went to see it.
Interesting. The trailer, as it stands officially, begins with Jack Nicholson. Very cleverly, almost as a voiceover way. So you have the scenes for a very short while of, obviously, the scenes you've described. You've got, just sequences that suggest, this taking place in Washington. This is a courtroom. But you've got the voice of Jack Nicholson to kind of start it. And then, of course, you end with him losing it completely in a courtroom and Tom Cruise saying, I want the truth.
The truth.
And therefore, for an audience, you kind of go, well, and I think what's interesting as well about the trailer and the movie, unlike other movies, the audience knows as much as the characters. So we know what has happened to Santiago. We know it's terrible. We know that the family can't get through the walls and the kind of the way in which the army protect itself and kind of close ranks. So they try in obviously a different way, and Demi Moore to take on the case. And I think what is interesting about the movie, and I think there's an interesting hint about how to tell the story, your point about the content spotlight, which is that the character of Tom Cruise is flawed. In fact, I don't think he's really he cares much because that's going to go against what he wants, which is the lifestyle. He doesn't want to work hard at it. And this looks like a case that requires hard work. And you're right, between Demi Moore and Kevin Pollak, the characters, they turn him around. But so the trailer is also superbly in sync with the movie, which is rarer because I think sometimes you and I would say, as part of film marketing, oh yeah, there's a trailer, and we move on very quickly because what is there to say? Or sometimes the trailer is actually misleading or shows you the best bits. But this trailer, which is why I want to insist on people, for research purposes, watch it because it's superbly edited and tells a story in 2.5 minutes, perfectly matching the 2.5 hours of the film.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's we watched it again last night, Pascal, and again, absolutely edge of the seat stuff. That last 20 minutes where Tom Cruise cross-examines Nicholson in the courtroom, it is just absolutely electrifying. Incredible performances.
Well, there you have it. I'm already exhausted just thinking about the film, and I'm going to be watching it this weekend, of course. But this was episode 39. I promise it was a big one and a good one, and I do believe we, met that goal. Roger Edwards, thank you very much for being such a wonderful co-host. Viewers and listeners, thank you for your support. Please leave comments and suggestions in usual places. Until the next one, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards.